All right. Welcome back to another episode, everybody. This is the Scientific Outdoorsman Podcast. And if you're new to the podcast, let me just tell you a little bit about what we do here. Like the name implies, we dive into the science of wildlife and hunting and fishing and anything outdoors. And we try to take the knowledge from researchers and try to apply that to our own approaches to the outdoors to make us better hunters, fishermen, or wildlife managers. Not that any of us have jobs that allow us to manage wildlife, but if we did, we would. But maybe they'll listen to this podcast. Who knows? Anyway, today we've got a special guest. We've got Brittany Parker. Say hi.
Hi, everyone.
You can leave yourself unmuted. It's cool.
Okay.
So Brittany, you're the regional coordinator for what are the states that you coordinate for backcountry hunters and anglers?
I'm the chapter coordinator for BHA, also known as Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And my region is, I manage 7 states. So Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, and Oregon. I think that's 7.
Yeah.
So, yeah. A lot of the heavy hitters out west. Yeah.
I was kind of like half expecting you to get hung up on the last one, like I always do. I'm like, shit, who's the 7th one? Who's the 7th? Yeah. That was good. You did good. And you're located in Colorado, right?
Yeah, I'm in Leadville, Colorado.
Where's that?
It's on the Continental Divide, essentially, and it's at 10,000 feet elevation. So pretty high up, and we're probably like a couple hours west of Denver, just up in the high country.
So do you have just like elk walking around your neighborhood? If you're up at 10,000 feet, I'd imagine they are.
Yeah, we had a moose like right on the other side of the fence, a few months ago. So
cool. Yeah,
and foxes and all the critters. There was some foxes checking out my chickens 2 days ago.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
I'm excited to come over there and go mess around chasing elk with Matt in 2 weeks. So
yeah, it's coming up quick.
Yeah,
exciting.
It's awesome.
Anyway, so what the heck are we going to talk about today? So Brittany kind of gave us this cool idea of this white paper that she wrote, which is focused on, I guess in a nutshell, the impacts that non-consumptive recreation can have on wild game species. And specifically, the paper we're going to be focused on is focused on trail systems, like hiking trail systems, and the impacts that they can have on elk, which I think is a really cool topic because, I think a lot of people tend to, point the finger at hunters and say, well, you're worse than me because you're killing these animals and all we're doing is just walking around the landscape. But a lot of research has been coming out recently that's showing that that's not the full story and that just being on the landscape can have impacts. And those impacts can be detrimental to the point of causing, elk to die due to a variety of different things. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. Before we dive into that, though, of course, we got to make a couple of announcements. And I'm super excited about this one. I've been talking about this for months, but Florida finally voted we are getting a bear hunt, which is insane. Honestly, it's kind of crazy that we managed to get this to go through. Kudos to everybody that showed up to the meetings that's been working with our wildlife managers. And kudos to all the people at Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They've been catching a lot of flack from the anti-hunting community, but they stuck to the science and, they saw the benefit in having this hunt and we're going through with it. So starting in September, you're going to be able to apply for a bear tag. There's going to be 187 bear tags available. It's a very, very low conservative number. And the hunt is going to be open in December. So this is happening very quickly. And I'm just going to throw this out there that, the last time Florida had a bear hunt, it ended after just 2 days. And then the thing got shut down and we didn't have another one for 10 years. So who knows how long this one's going to last. I think FWC is far better prepared for all the litigation that's inevitably going to follow this decision. But hey, I would suggest everybody put in, your applications. This could be a once in a lifetime hunt. So put in your applications. Let's raise some money for conservation for the Florida black bear. And, hopefully people can get out there and fill some tags this season. I'm pretty stoked about it. That's all I got. Does anybody else got anything?
I was just going to follow up on that. So, that's awesome. So congrats to Florida. So is it also a 2-day season similar to last time, or is it going to be?
No. So the last season was structured completely differently. And I've kind of mentioned this before, like FWC did a really good job with what they proposed this time around to really address all the concerns that not only the hunting community, but also the anti-hunting community had with the structure of the last hunt. So the last one was more of what you call a derby style hunt, which is basically like anybody can buy a tag. All you got to do is just buy a tag. It was $100 for residents, $300 for non-residents. And then there was I think it was 7 days or maybe 9 days to fill your tag. Once the quota is hit, they close it. So everybody just goes, it's a kind of a free for all. And, once they hit that quota, which was, I think, around 300 bears, they got to 296 and they were like, all right, we got to stop. That's a derby style hunt. This time around, it's going to be, you get this tag and you have this tag for the whole season. The season's going to be 26 days, something in that ballpark. So it's a little longer. It allows people to be more selective so they can pick out, a male bear. They don't have to worry about somebody else, filling the quota before them. They can just take their time. And there's a number of things that were implemented for this particular hunt to push the harvest more towards, a male harvest, so to reduce that female harvest. So, it's going to be a completely different structure. And I think it's going to be a really successful hunt. So I'm super excited about it.
Nice. Yeah, that's exciting.
You're putting in for tag, I'm assuming.
I think it would be absolutely insane if I didn't.
Yeah, Cody?
Which is funny because when I started advocating for it, I really didn't have that much interest in bear hunting. And
really?
It's because of all the research that I've done and all the arguing that I've done about this topic that I've become more interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's really cool to see that happen in a state where hunting a certain species that was originally prohibited is coming back. I feel like that's less common now. I feel like in a lot of the states, Colorado, California, they're trying to stop a lot of these hunts. In Colorado, we lost the spring bear hunt. And I foresee in the future efforts from the anti-hunting groups to get rid of bear hunting altogether, even though we've got a crazy, enormous population of black bears in the state. So that's really cool.
Yeah. And I think it's also, it's the North American model of conservation in action. This is what it was designed to do. And if you look historically at all the species that have been adopted into the wild game system, we've never lost one. Any species that has been in a critical position, and there's been plenty. In fact, most of the game species have been at a point where it's oh shit, we might lose them. Rocky Mountain elk were in that situation. Moose have been in that situation. Turkeys, even white-tailed deer. All these different species. I think there's several types of brook trout. A number of different trout species. Same situation as we're seeing right now with the bear. And the North American model dictates that when you hit that point where that population is sustainable enough to have a hunt, you got to capitalize on that resource and put value on that resource so that people have a reason to keep it around. And so, you gave this example of states taking it away. And I think California is a great example of that. They have, mountain lions and bears, and you can't hunt any of them, and they're running rampant, and it's a huge problem. When you get to that point, the North America model dictates that you should reopen that hunt, but keep it really regulated. And a lot of states don't get to, they take it away, but then they don't give it back. And Florida's done a really good job, not just with the bears, but also with like our Goliath groupers. Is kind of a similar situation. They have made a comeback. They're not like fully back to where they once were, but they're doing better. And they recently opened up a limited draw tag system for them as well. So Florida's done a really good job at sticking to the North America model, and I'm super proud to to work with our game agency on that stuff.
And for the alligators too, right? Like at one point in time.
That's a great example as well. They were basically extinct. In fact, some might argue that they were worse off than any of the other game species in the country. Like they were basically gone. And now I forget what the numbers are, but I think there's like 4 million. I feel like there's more.
Believe it.
Yeah, there's a lot of gators, so I think we have more than 4 million. I might have pulled that number out of my ass. It happens.
So you're saying we need a Florida Panther hunt coming up
here.
Whoa.
Oh, I don't know. That's a whole different topic. But I mean, if we're being completely honest, at some point in time, that's going to be a conversation that probably needs to be had. We're going to reach a point where, that population is needing, some management as well. And we've talked about, mountain lions on this podcast, and like kind of made the point that like, most of the time the amount of tags being given out for mountain lions is like 6. Like for this unit, it's going to be 6 mountain lions. And like, so the number of tags can be really low. And so there's no reason to think that we couldn't potentially do something like that with the Florida Panther. But I don't even want to like talk about that because that's still an endangered species. It's on the ESA, But, it would be fantastic to see that species reach a point where its population is strong enough that we could potentially have a hunt for it. And I think we're going to see it, which is like a huge success story for conservation. But anybody who hears me say what we just said is probably going to lose their minds over it. Like, oh my God, we want to hunt panthers, But yeah. Exciting stuff. Lots of exciting stuff.
All right.
In other news.
Yeah.
Yeah, in other news, Cody learned a valuable lesson this weekend. Yeah.
What? Wait, I did? Or
yeah, Cody learned a very valuable lesson. Well, I think we both did. My lesson was don't trust your rangefinder when your gut is telling you that deer is closer. Because I had a buck at 15 yards, and my rangefinder told me 25, and I shot right over its back.
Was that Saturday morning?
That was Saturday. Yeah. Was it morning or afternoon?
That was afternoon, I think.
It was the afternoon, yeah.
Have you tested your rangefinder since?
Yeah, no, I think what happened is I probably just like ranged something like behind it, like over its back. But you're sitting there like shaking. Like, the doe's 5 yards from me. I'm trying not to move, and I'm like, yep, 25. Okay, it must be 25. Or he moved closer, since I ranged it. I don't know what happened. But, like, after I shot, like, I remember seeing that arrow, like, zip right past him. And then he ran off, and I stood up. And then I saw he was at 50 yards, and I sent another one and hit, like, a twig. And it deflected, and I missed him. But after the fact, like, I started thinking about it. I was like, there's no way that was 25 yards. Like, it was like right in front of me. So I should have trusted my gut. I would have killed it, but whatever. But no, the lesson that Cody learned. You want to tell him what you learned, Cody?
Wait. Okay. I am an amateur cameraman.
Well, everybody starts out as an amateur.
But what happened to your camera?
What?
What happened to your camera?
My camera was running, but then the battery died because the interaction was taking so long.
I thought the memory card filled up.
No, it was the battery. The battery died.
All right, that's not your fault. All right.
But Cody learned that just because you pushed the button doesn't mean the camera's recording. You should check, make sure that little red light is blinking.
I was
So-
I was tucked back a little further watching him.
So unfortunately, we don't have any footage of the actual shot. So.
It would have been like 10 seconds of footage, but I'm pretty bummed that
It was a
didn't
really
actually
epic.
record
It was
that.
like an
It
epic.
was so cool.
Yeah,
I was
it's-
what, like 50 yards behind you, and I was
You
shaking.
could have shot the deer from where you were.
I was really. It was really cool hunt
Yeah.
to watch.
So
You should
Anyway,
get
that's
like
not-
some fake antlers and put them on cypress and recreate it.
yeah, no, I might use. I've done this in the past where like I didn't get footage. I'll use like a cartoon deer. Like I'll basically freeze the last frame that I have, and then like make a cartoon deer come in, so I can at least show like what happened. I don't know. I got to figure something out, but I was pretty bummed I didn't get that. This is not an announcement. This is just me finding an excuse to give Cody shit. That's all. But that said, I do appreciate Cody that you came out and filmed like all weekend. That was pretty sick.
That was pretty cool. I had a
Yeah.
lot of fun. But
All
I'm
right.
pretty bummed didn't get that on footage, on camera.
Yeah, I'm pretty bummed too. Yeah. Anyway, should we talk about like hiking and elk?
I think
Let's do
so.
it.
All right. Take it away, Matt.
So yeah, so kind of like you were saying, there's this question of how do recreationists beyond hunters, so we've got like your hikers, mountain bikers, all these different folks, how does their presence on the landscape, in the woods, on these trails influence how animals are moving around? And so yeah, we brought Britt in today because like you said, she's spent a lot of time thinking about this, has a really great article out on BHA. We'll post a link down below if folks want to read that. That just kind of gets at why this is an issue that we need to consider. That was a little bit more focused on Colorado, but also it's just something where at like the national level, there's a lot of people that are getting outside, which is great. I'm all for people getting outside, but that means that there's going to potentially be some changes that need to happen in terms of how we're interacting with these animals. I think there was something that I was reading that was saying, this actually led to the Forest Service changing some of the regulations back in like 2005 on how people could use public lands, especially the national forests. Thinking about, where can these ATVs go, stuff like that, because we really don't want to get to a point that we're disrupting everything. What was that?
I said the parking lot. That's where they can go.
Yeah. Well, it's. I don't have an ATV. I wish I did, but those are also things that do support to conservation away with this, taxes on sales. And I'm all in favor of people getting outside and enjoying the outdoors, because I think that's something that we really need in this country to really promote conservation of these species. Because if people aren't appreciating the outdoors, that's when you're going to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Does Pittman Robertson apply to power sports? I don't think it does. I don't think excise taxes apply to like ATVs and stuff like that.
No, but I think he's referring to like registrations. That goes to the state agency. Well, at least in Colorado, it goes to the state agency, the state wildlife.
So are there like specific registrations that you have to get in order to use it on public lands or something like that?
You just have to register your
Okay.
your OHV, like your dirt
I got
bike, your side by side, yeah, and just like your boat, like when you register your boat in the state of Colorado, that goes to the state wildlife agency.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still some conservation funds. I got you.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so and also just if people have investment in these resources or these environments, they're going to be more likely to protect it. So the huge BHA movement that happened, not BHA, but kind of national movement recently, BHA definitely had a loud voice in it to, keep public lands in public hands. All these people that are out on these public lands, whether they're walking, mountain biking, horseback riding, they now have investment in that too. And they want to protect it just as much as, anyone else that's using that land does. So there's definitely a lot of value, and I'm happy to see all these people are getting involved. But at the same time, we need to recognize that these are still spaces that these animals need to live, and our presence there is going to have an impact. So there's a lot of research that's been coming out that's looking into this. Brett, I don't know if you want to provide any more feedback kind of from your experience looking into this stuff, is just like kind of what is this? What are the concerns? And what are kind of studies seeing right now? Then we can dive a little more into the specific paper from Oregon, but from a Colorado perspective, is there anything that you've really found really stuck out to you?
Well, I think you made some great points in terms of, there's this like conflict of wanting more people to get outside and experience the outdoors. So we have more stewards and more advocates for the outdoors. But then there's also the flip side to that, where too many people on the landscape can cause more damage and just create more problems, making it harder and harder to conserve and be a steward of the land. And so I think this type of research in terms of understanding the impacts of recreation in all various forms is really important, because I feel like a lot of people who recreate, and I'll speak from my personal experience before I got into hunting, I was a whitewater paddler. I am a whitewater paddler, mountain biker. I did all of these things, and I just kind of felt like by default, I was a steward of the land. And I was, because I loved it and because I cared about it, I was a steward of the land. And I had no idea what my impacts were. I had no idea that my presence on the land impacted elk populations or spread invasive plant species. So there's this research is good because I think it takes away this concept that hunters and anglers are the only consumers on the landscape, where hunters and anglers are referenced. It's considered consumptive recreation, and everything else is non-consumptive. But this research is great because it helps illustrate that we're all consuming in some way. We're all taking in some way, whether that's a trail fragments a landscape and creates all sorts of impacts and challenges that we have to try to mitigate. And so my hope is that this research will help to raise awareness around everyone's impacts and then create more initiatives to hold these other user groups accountable in the sense of making sure that they're also contributing to the conservation of wildlife in these landscapes and not just hunters and anglers.
Yeah, that's a great point. I never thought of it in this kind of like what you're saying, but like in a way, everyone that's using this land is now competing with the organisms that are there, right? They're competing for the space, and that any competition can have a negative effect. And it also kind of reminds me of like almost all the hiking trails I've been to here in Colorado have the boot brushes. You're probably familiar with them. So, to stop the spread of invasives, scrub your boots on these to get off any seeds and things like that. And just having folks be aware of that. And it just shows, everyone's having an impact here, not just the people who are out there hunting or angling. So yeah, great point.
Yeah, that was a newer thought for me, I'll admit. Like coming from a fisheries background, I think of ballast water, bilge water, spreading invasives, but clinging to your shoes and clothes, like I'll admit, I don't think of that. So that was pretty interesting.
Well, when you go out and like, any WMA in Florida, like when you come home, like how many seeds are stuck to your pants?
The Caesar weed is out of control.
Weed,
that's invasive.
There's a bunch of other ones too. They stick to your pants. And like, I'll be honest, like, I don't know that I do my best to get them off, but like, there's no way literally, I just pulled one off my pants out here in Alabama that definitely came from Florida, so it's a prime example. Luckily it's not going to grow in the trash can here, but we're all moving, these things around. But Cody, you said coming from like a fisheries background, like I think there's a lot of analogous things to consider like in fisheries like that really relate to this. And I think, the one that immediately comes to mind to me is catch and release fishermen have this same mentality of like, well, you guys are killing the fish, we're letting them go, so we have no impact. And it's like, well, actually, like this percentage of the fish that you release die anyway. Like you're still having an impact. You just don't get to see it. We see it and then we benefit from that impact that we have. But your impact like just happens after you leave, you know?
There's a great example of that and I don't know, Matt, you might know about this as well, but up at the Frying Pan in Colorado, where they were advocating for anglers to start taking some of their catch of, I believe it's brown trout, because they're out competing the native fish, and they're all up in arms about that because they want the big sporty fish, right? And so taking them out is like impacting their experience, but you know, it's a fish that's not native to that stream. So anyway, I thought that was
it's a very strange mentality that like hunters have, because like, you also have to keep in mind, like, a lot of hunters are not scientists, they're not ecologists, they don't necessarily understand the tool that they are, you know, like hunters are a tool for managers to use to keep things in balance. Those managers set, you know, regulations and then allow hunters to operate within those bounds. But a lot of those hunters don't understand why those regulations are the way that they are. So, you know, a lot of hunters have this mentality of like, well, the regulations should be set in a way that makes like me the only hunter. Like, they want to get rid of other predators, you know, like, it's like, no, those predators also have value on the landscape. Like, we can manage them, but we can't just like eradicate them, you know? And it's always hard having that conversation with hunters. It's like, it doesn't really click.
mm-hmm.
I guess that's kind of the point of this podcast, is to try to like put things in a, you know, a perspective that, you know, the average person is better able to understand.
And make us better.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just said it. And just to make us better, right? Make us better.
Yeah.
More
better in every way, like as hunters, but also, like I said, as managers, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think there's kind of not necessarily a trade-off. You know, I think these two things can go together, but basically between kind of the hunting's, you know, success, or in a way like the sport of it. Same with fishing, the sport of it, where, you know, with like those brown trout, that's the example of like, they want to get the biggest fish. But then there's also the conservation side of things, where hunting and fishing can support conservation. But like you're saying, Mark, you have to have the management actions that help direct it in that way, rather than just trying to get the things that are going to be, you know, I want to catch this more than I want to catch something, you know, the native species. So it's definitely an interesting trade-off. And, you know, it's, again, a nice thing about this podcast, where we get to hopefully help explain some of that and draw some appreciation to the native stuff.
I think we're getting all into this discussion and stuff, but like, maybe let's talk about this paper a little bit and give the listeners a better understanding of what we all seem to kind of already know. So yeah, let's talk about the paper a little bit, and then we'll come back to this discussion.
So bringing things back in, still thinking about how people are having an effect on the landscape. So there was this really cool paper that Britt shared with us that was looking at the way that elk respond to 4 different types of recreation. So they didn't look at hunting, but rather they were looking at ATV use, hiking, mountain biking, and horseback riding. And this was all done on this fenced-in area up in Oregon. It was about 40 square miles of an area that's been fenced in, which I thought that was just kind of crazy for research on these large-bodied ungulates. So not just elk, but other species as well. And then within that, this study was on about 3,600 acres, and there were about 125 elk within that fenced-in area. So, you know, there's not really much for, I think the last hunting activity was about 7 years prior to this study happened. So it's really a protected population. And then there's a trail network that goes through the whole area, kind of switchbacking and whatnot. And they wanted to see how the elk responded to the presence in response to the trails, but then also in response to people. And the way that they did that was they, throughout 2 years, I think it was 2003 and 2004, from spring to fall, they tracked people who had designated routes on the trail network, whether they were on mountain bike, horseback, walking, or ATV, and then saw how the elk responded to that, whether it was elk responding to distance from the trail or actually distance from the people. So they tracked the people. People had designated routes. You know, they weren't going off looking for elk. They just had to follow this route. And then they also tracked about 30 cow elk and then saw how their distances changed, whether there were people on the landscape, what the people were doing, or whether it was kind of this control period where there wasn't anything going on. And ran a bunch of different models, and then based on that, looked at how these different activities influence the elk distribution. And as we might expect, elk responded to all activities. They stayed further from the trail, stayed further from the people, but the type of activity did make a difference where ATVs really have an influence on the elk distribution. They stay further away compared to the hiking, mountain biking, and horseback riding, and just really seem to stay away from the people in general as well. But I mean, it's not really a surprise. I guess the surprise there, though, is that the non-motorized activities still had a pretty substantial effect, whether you're just walking around or if you were still on like a bike. So that was kind of interesting to learn about, because it goes back to what Britt was saying earlier. Like, if you're on the landscape, we're competing for space. We're going to be influencing where these animals are going.
One thing I just thought of that I'm curious about is like, if the way that the elk responded is different. So, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Like, if an ATV drives through an area, the elk can hear it from a distance and go, fuck that, I'm going the other way. Whereas like somebody walking by on a horse, they can't really hear it, but they could smell it. So like, did they respond when they got, when they crossed paths with where that horse had been and they smelled it and they go, fuck that, I'm going that way, or for instance, a mountain bike, they're not going to hear that really. But it's not leaving as much scent behind as, say, a horse would. So, like, I'm kind of curious, like, what the mechanisms are that, like, allowed the elk to make the decision to keep their distance,
Yeah, and they do talk about that a little bit at the end. And so they also, like, when they were doing all the studies, they would go out along the trail and they'd figure out, what's the maximum line of sight that you could have for each different point along the trail, to get an idea of, could this be a line of sight thing? Is it something where they're seeing it and they're responding? And when people were on the landscape, a lot of times the elk stayed beyond what that maximum line of sight would have been. Beyond that distance from the trail, not even the people. They were even further from the people. So to me, that says, they're way beyond line of sight. So it's definitely got something to do with smell or hearing. The cool thing, well, maybe not cool, but the fascinating thing about the ATVs was they saw kind of two different types of responses, whether it was hiding or fleeing. So you had some elk that just kind of hunkered down, and it's like they knew that this thing was just going to go by really fast, and they just kind of waited it out. Whereas, someone on horseback or walking around, there's going to be a lot more potential for kind of like an interaction in a sense. So with those types of interactions or those types of recreationists, the elk tended to always or more consistently kind of flee from that spot. So to me, that says, there is sight, there's sound, and then the smell part's kind of interesting, because I was wondering, are horses going to cover up the scent of people?
But it's still a smell that they're not used to.
True.
And it's a smell that's probably associated with arrows flying at them. And has been associated with that for 100 years,
Yeah.
Or longer than that even. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know my history too well, but how long have we had horses in the U.S.? Like, were the natives using horses? I believe so, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so did the Spaniards bring in horses like in like the 1400s or something like that? And so it was probably for the past 600 years or so.
Yeah. Like, if they smelled a horse, there was probably a human on it that would want to kill them.
But I wonder if, I guess that association, that smell by association thing would make sense. I just wonder if like something about the smell of a horse is familiar in the way as like they're like one of us, and maybe it's less.
I don't know. They only have one hoof. They don't have the split. One of them, not one of us.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I will say
interesting.
the one thing that was fascinating. So ATVs had, the biggest response, or the elk responded most to the ATVs, went the furthest away. Was a little bit of a lesser extent with the mountain bikes, and then hiking and horseback riding was kind of the lowest on the spectrum. But the distance that elk remained from the trail was lowest for horseback riding. And so to me, that got me wondering, could that be something where there's less concern when because that's another thing, right? It's like, oh, there's this other big bodied animal and the people aren't killing that. So maybe I'm safe, right? Kind of like herd stuff, herd immunity in a way.
I don't know if their thought process is that complicated, but since we're talking about how to be better hunters, I'm learning I should go hunting with a horse. But they didn't do just people walking, right? Just hiking.
So they had just people hiking, then they had people on horseback, mountain biking.
And so the elk stayed further away when people were just hiking by themselves than if they had horses?
Yeah, so it was, further from the trail. So they were about 260 yards away on average from the trail when people were on horseback. So just during that test period, it'd be like 5 days in a row when people would be on horseback. And on average, elk would stay, like I said, 260 yards from the trail. So not the people or the horses, but from the trail itself. And then when hikers were there, it was up to 300 yards. ATVs was up to 340 yards from the trail. So each of those things, it's a little bit further away that the elk are staying from the trail. But then the other cool thing that they'd looked at was, they had a control period right after that test period, which was like a 9-day control period where there was no activity going on. And they compared distance from the trail during the test period when you had the recreationists on there, and then that control period. And they looked at the difference. And so the difference between when people were hiking on the trail and the control right after that was the smallest, so it was smaller. So that made it seem like there was less of an effect, even though the elk were slightly further from the trail, because right afterwards, they didn't come all the way back to the trail.
I'm gonna hop up on a soapbox here real quick as a scientist. Point out the difference between statistical significance and effect size. How much do we really care about 40 meters?
Well, that's a good point. So it's something where these things they're close, right? And so it's, in that sense, it doesn't have much of an effect. But when you look at what the maximum distance to like line of sight to the trails was, that was right at about 300 yards. So these elk were staying just beyond that maximum distance. Now, who knows if that's what they were actually thinking about or not, all along the trail.
Bow hunting, 40 meters
terms of like,
pretty significant.
Yeah, no, exactly. In terms of like hunting, if you're bow hunting, 40 yards matters, But ecologically speaking, I don't know that 40 meters really matters that much, I mean, I don't know. Like,
well, sure. So, I can see that. But if you look at, ATVs versus the horseback riding, now you're talking 80 yards. And so that's starting to get, and it's 80 yards when, the maximum is 340. That's a good chunk of distance relative to the total distance that they're staying off the trail.
And it does say, I in the chat, I put a link to an infographic that was made based on this research. And the ATV or dirt roads, the distance to which elk may take flight was 2,400, was anywhere from 879 meters to 2,400 meters. So and then there's hiking, which is 547 meters to 750 meters. So even if it doesn't seem like a significant change in distance, it's still, when you think about how valuable that time is to the elk in terms of calorie use, in terms of consumption of calories and foraging periods, that's a disruption of that. And they're not only burning, but they're not foraging. So the more time they're spending fleeing from something, the more calories they're burning. And there's been other studies.
And the less they're eating.
While they're running.
Yeah.
Sure.
The more time you spend running, the less time you spend eating, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's other studies that have there's one done in Colorado that showed these collared cow elk that experienced disturbance from hikers or recreation mountain bikers that were pregnant, and their success rate was something like dropped by like 60% of bringing those calves to
Well, and
yeah.
you also bring up a really good point, though, with the timing. If that disruption happens in like the winter time and you bump them out of, a thermal refuge or, the one little nook that still has some food for them, that could be certain death, especially if they feel like they need to run away, a much further distance, and they're not going to come back to that area for several days. That's several days of thermal refuge or forage that they're missing out on. So I think the timing of it really is important, which I think it brings up an interesting discussion point. Hunters have seasons, like there's certain times of the year that we are out there looking for elk or mule deer, any wild game, right? And typically those are not going to be during those really critical time periods. Whereas other types of recreation, there's no, there's no season on them, right? Like, I mean, not that anybody wants to go like mountain biking in February, but like, you know what I mean? Like you can go hiking, you can go whatever, snowshoeing, stuff like that, any time of year. And then you really have the potential to disrupt them during that critical time frame. So maybe something that like should be considered is putting seasons on these non-consumptive uses. And I know that like shed hunting already has a season for that exact reason, but like, why isn't mountain biking and hiking and skiing and, well, I guess skiing, obviously has to happen when there's snow on the ground, but like, like maybe that's something we should consider, is that some of these other forms of recreation should have more restriction on them, just like hunting does.
And there is, I think this knowledge has, inspired seasonal closures in a lot of places in Colorado and probably across the West. There's winter closures. There's winter closures here where I live in Leadville and down in Eagle, and that helps prevent. And that is, so this research and just like general mapping and understanding of like what are the production areas for elk, where's their severe winter range and their winter concentration areas, and that can help inform those seasonal closures and when those need to begin and when they can end. So I think this research is really helpful in helping to explain to the public why these closures are important too.
Yeah, I think that's that last bit about like kind of this research explaining it. There was one finding that they had where I think it was about 44% of the time that these elk were, in the study period, for 44% of the time, they were in the 15% of the land that was furthest from the trails. So, if you have a random coverage of the land and the elk and everything, for 44% of the time, you'd expect them to be on 44% of the land, but they really got concentrated into those small pockets that were furthest from the people. And so if you think about exactly that, like how people moving around on the landscape are going to be influencing these elk, they're going to just move away from where there's people. So if you're walking right through their critical wintering habitat, whether you're looking for sheds, you're doing whatever, you're going to be pushing them out of that area that they really need to use.
And was that the case even before they did the study, like when there was no human use on the landscape?
So that was just during the recreation periods. I don't know. Well,
because I guess like it's important to consider like what they were doing before humans, had an impact. Because you said
Yeah.
it's been 7 years since the last hunt. So like, was it being completely left alone at that point? Was the only like impact of man the trail system that was there, but the people weren't using it?
So yeah, that's a good question. I didn't really see anything in the paper about that, which is actually one of the things that, I was wondering about with these results. I think what we're seeing in this study is going to be in some ways maybe a more extreme case of what we'd expect, because I don't know if, are ATVs on this thing during all those other periods. And if they aren't, then these elk might be more responsive to these impacts, right? If you have ATVs going by every day and the elk aren't having any negative impact associated with it, maybe they start to habituate a little bit. I'm sure they're not going to be close by. Maybe they just never come back to that area too. But just having an understanding of, what are the baseline stressors from people to see, is this something that...
I guess there's like two ways to look at it though. They almost need to have this 40-mile fenced in area, like two different versions of it. Like one where there is constantly human activity to see like how that has sort of like a permanent effect, like what that baseline would look like. And then an area where there's no human activity and then suddenly it's introduced. Right. So that you can see like, does the way that they react to that increase in use change based on how much use there was beforehand?
And honestly, I think it could, like, the results could be even more extreme if it wasn't fenced in, right? Like this could be like a total low range because they don't have, it's not open terrain, right? Like they're contained. So there's the possibility that they could have, with enough use, gone just further and maybe just abandon the area completely. So yeah.
But I also think if that were the case, there'd be some evidence like of them going to the furthest extent of what they could do.
They had that evidence.
Yeah. They did? Like they're just like they're like pressing themselves up against the fence, like get me the fuck out of here.
So they were talking about how a lot of these elk, it wasn't, like all the elk, so it wasn't something like these, it wasn't the most common reaction, but there were a lot of times where elk just try to get as far away from the people as they could get, like over a couple thousand yards away, that they were just trying to go away. And largely got to kind of the extent of, if you have a trail that goes right through the middle and the area is only, so many acres. Yeah, they're definitely limited. And I've heard of elk, you spook them and next thing you know, they're 2 mountain ridges over. So I think that's a great point, Britt, that it's probably the distances that we're seeing probably are somewhat limited.
It sounds like learned behaviors to me, and the only way to prevent them from passing those learned behaviors on is to kill them. So I think we should probably get rid of all non-consumptive recreation.
Very strong language.
Can we? I don't think we mentioned kind of the incentive a little bit for this, where these non-consumptive recreational activities are super popular, and you guys in Colorado are seeing population increases like a lot of other states. Like we're during post-COVID, I think Florida at one point I saw was receiving like 1,000 people a day. Was it?
We are currently receiving 1,200 to 1,500 people a day moving to Florida.
Whoa.
Well, all those old people aren't going outside. They're just going to the villages.
My grandpa lives in the villages.
Half of those people that are moving here are getting buried a few weeks later. So,
but is that why it's so green down there? All the fertilizer.
That's so much dark. Nitrogen. It's crazy.
That's so dark. but we're concerned from the paper that there might be incentive to create more of these trails and recreational opportunities, right? So can you, not to put you on the spot, can you maybe talk a little bit about the conclusion? Are you guys ready for that?
Yeah.
I mean, I have questions about that exact thing, but I want to hear Britt's take on it. Give us your hot take. That's something kids say these days, right? The hot take.
I wouldn't
Bet,
know.
bet, bro.
Yeah, that.
No cap.
Okay, that was like 5 years ago, dude.
Was it?
I think so. I don't think people say that anymore. Now I think they got rid of the no. It's just cap. They just say cap.
No.
Cap is lie, right? No cap
No.
is like I'm telling the truth.
Maybe, I don't know.
No clue.
I think I'm the oldest person in this room, so I certainly should not know this.
Okay, I'm sorry. So what about the conclusion? Do you want me to?
Yeah, like
The
what do you
incentive,
think?
like because there's more people wanting to go outside and there's more people in Colorado, like there's an incentive to make more trails. Like, how do we respond to that? What's your take? What do you do with that?
It's such a really heavy, hard question. I would say like the canned answer would be just building trails close to already disturbed areas. So essentially having those sacrificial zones where we just accept, like areas close to population centers. Those are kind of the areas where if we need to expand, we can. Should we? I don't think so. I'm not, because for me, it's just like to what end? And I feel like, you give them an inch, they take a mile. And it's just hard to really ever put a cap on it. So I don't necessarily, it's something I think about a lot because I mean, I'm just kind of that, I can fall into that like anti-growth kind of group. And it's not the most helpful because it's
not realistic.
It's happening, right? So I would say, using this research, using the mapping and the understanding that we have of elk movements and habitat areas, critical areas, and protecting those is important, and using it to inform seasonal closures is important and something that we can do. And I think really staying away from expanding trails in areas of critical habitat, period, not just because seasonal closures only work if you have people there to enforce them. And right now we know like the public land agencies and are getting gutted and do not have a ton of capacity. And then our state wildlife agencies are already understaffed and overworked. And so for me, my sentiment is not expanding or building trails in those areas, because even if you say you're just going to build one, people spread out, and you'll soon see like a spider web network of trails that will proliferate out from that single trail, just through, people, just social trail building is a real thing out here and a real problem. So
I'm not as familiar with other forms, but I know for sure like BMX, bikers definitely will go off trail, build their own little routes. Like I'm sure horseback riders and I'm sure they're doing all that as well. Yeah.
Like, I guess the big question is like, is it better to have low impact in a large area or high impact in a small area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't really know what the answer to that question is. It's such a hard, it's a very complicated thing to look at.
I mean, yeah.
But also another thing to consider is like, if you go with high impact in a small area, then you also kind of put a cap on how many people are going to be willing, because people go out there to get away from people. And when like Matt, you and I went hiking on a trail in Montana, and I mean, we ran into so many people there. It was like that's not really what I'm trying to experience when I go walking around in the mountains. You know, like if I run into one other person, I'm like, this place is burned up, you know, no, you know, so like there's got to be other people that have that mentality. And so maybe just saying, hey, look, if you want to spend time outside, that's fine. But like you're not getting a trail. And if you're not okay with going off trail, then like maybe you should find a new hobby, you know, because I do think that like, you know, somebody that wants to go hike off trail, but they only hike that spot like once is really not going to have much of an impact. You know, which is why like hunters, like we're just, you know, we hike to a spot. We're not following any particular path.
Mm-hmm.
We're not really having much of an impact. So I think confining people to like a limited number of trails either encourages them to sort of find their own routes and have a lower impact, or just go do something else, go to the arcade.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. And I was just looking up, I wrote something about hiking off trail, like making a case for hiking off trail, because I think like right now we've created this taboo against hiking off trail. So I've been asked so many times, just like, how do you feel as a hunter? How do you feel about hiking off trail? And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, I mean, do you feel like you're not supposed to hike off trail? And, you know, those rules.
That's a thing?
Yeah. Well, and those rules were created because people would, you know, cut switchbacks or create shortcuts. And so you'd get like, again, like what I'm talking about, that network of trails.
Yeah.
And so, yes, like it makes sense in certain areas, but there's a social cultural taboo now about hiking off trail. And it's scary for a lot of people because they rely so heavily on that trail, you know, to take them to where they want to go. And as soon as they get off of it, they're just like, don't know what the hell to do. Right. So, but
I was just going to say, like, if you're scared of getting off trail, you probably shouldn't go in the woods.
I know. I agree with you. But there's the national park in Alaska. Geez Louise, which one is it?
I mean, how many times do you hear stories every year, though, of somebody like getting lost because they went off trail?
Yeah, I mean,
and then they get found like 100 yards from the trail, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I just do want to say the one thing, you know, I agree that there's, you know, there's value to kind of going off trail, and but there's also risk associated with it where, you know, like you were saying with like hiking, if you go off trail, you could potentially create erosion. If you're in like alpine zone, you can damage fragile habitat. But the other thing, like we were talking about before, is spread of invasive species, where trails typically have extremely high numbers of invasive species because you have so much human activity. Mm-hmm. And if you have people starting to disperse off trails much more frequently, you're probably going to see a lot more expansive spreads of these invasives. So I think it can be valuable, but you have to be aware of what you're doing.
Yeah.
I want to throw a but in there, because a part of the reason that a lot of those invasive species are on those trail systems is because those habitats are so disturbed. Because invasives do really well. Exactly. They do really well where habitats are disturbed. If you drop a non-native seed out in the middle of a pristine native forest, it probably won't survive. You know, it's going to be outcompeted by the natives.
Well, and I'll tell you, like, if someone looks at the side of a mountain and they don't see a trail, they're not, like, the majority of people are not going to go up that. So for me, I like that because it acts.
That's why I want to go there.
Right. It acts as a filter, right? And so it typically will attract the people that have the experience and knowledge to do that. And I was bringing up Denali National Park because they have 0 backcountry trails. So everything is, they have designated zones in which you can freely hike. And I would imagine, because I think, you know, their thought is like that dispersal prevents like some of that high rate use and then that intense disturbance that you get from trail creation that can create that, you know, that breeding ground for invasive species. that dispersal can be a lot better, because it's like that herd of elk may encounter, one person in that area every like month or so for a 3-month period, not enough for them to like not return to the site. So, I mean, I'd love to see more of that.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of like, not necessarily the same thing, but with a lot of the trails here in Colorado now, where there's so many people that they're permitting it, and like national parks, they're permitting it. And so I think that could work really well there, where you keep it from getting too populated, and the people who do go there, rather than have them all trampled down on the same trail, let them, have that option if they want it in a very specific spot that's going to have, maybe the least amount of an impact on the native species in that area. And then for people that want to wander off, you keep it from getting too populated in those, I guess, off-road spots.
Mm-hmm.
There is a caveat here, though, because humans are creatures of habit and we follow the path of least resistance. So we will all take the same path and create a trail, even though that's not the intent.
I mean, we're animals, right? So we follow
other animals.
I spend a lot of time on trails when I'm off trail, because I'm on
someone else's trail.
Trails. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if you go on like a cattle ranch, like you'll find these like beat down like cow trails, because they all walk single file down the same trail. Why? Because, well, the other cow did it and it was safe. And it's a path of least resistance. They've already trampled it down. So that's going to happen regardless with humans as well.
Yeah,
in fact, there was like a cool, I forget what city it was, but it was somewhere in Japan, to like build their metro system. They modeled it using slime molds to find the best connections that they could make. So they basically they put food. This is such a cool idea. And there's other examples of this too. They put food at like major station points that they felt like people needed to get to. And then they introduced slime molds, and the slime molds created the connections between the foods to move the nutrients. And then they just mimicked when they built their metro railroad station, they just mimicked that because it's the path of least resistance. And another cool example of this, I think it was the USF campus. I might be wrong on that, but one of the university campuses, when they built the campus, they put the buildings in and they didn't build trails. They didn't build walk paths. They just let people, the students, walk. And then eventually they basically created trails, and then they just looked at it from an aerial image, and then built the sidewalks on the trails that people had chosen. But the point is, we will all follow the same damn trail because we all have the same thought process of I need to get from here to there, and I'm going to do it the easiest way possible.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's really a good way to go about it. The only way you can go about it is just, like you said, Matt, permit it and limit the number of people that get to go on that landscape to the point where it's not going to allow those the vegetation in those areas to be impacted enough that it creates a disturbed trail system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of brings me back to Colorado hunting, where you have different units that have different number of permits that go out. And so you have areas where there's going to be a lot of people, allow more permits. And maybe with hiking, that's something where it's just completely open to everyone. If it is an area that you really, it's close to those population centers and you want it to be more inclusive, but then there's other spots that are more restrictive. And, the people who really are passionate about this stuff, they're the ones that are probably going to be willing to wait out and go to those areas. Whereas someone else, might not make a difference to them if they're in a spot that is really quiet, or if it's just, outside.
Yeah. So we always like to end this podcast with this question, which I don't know how applicable it is here, but from what we just discussed, how would this change the way that you guys go about your time in the woods, in the backcountry, as a hunter, as a fisherman? How does this impact the way that you go about things? And Britt, I'm gonna throw it at you first.
It's a great question. definitely, I mean, I do things like scrape my boots. That's a thing I do. Another, how it impacts the way I hunt and move through the woods. I would say I'm just more mindful of my impact, or I just have that knowledge of my impact, and so I'm very aware of all closures and making sure I'm paying attention to that. But also with hunting, I think even though we are consumptive and we do operate within seasons, and the amount of take is determined by biologists and experts, but we have to acknowledge that even when we're not harvesting elk, that we're still having an impact. So when I'm out there and I run into other hunters and I see hunters on the top of a mountain or a hill pushing elk down it, and then hunters at the bottom pushing elk up it. Like, I know that is having a really negative impact on the elk. It's energetically costly, and it's putting a lot of stress on them. So I just try to get as far and away from that as I can. And I try to spend a lot of my time in wilderness areas where, I know that can also be a filter for a lot of hunters and people if you're having to backpack in and put on a lot of miles. But yeah, I would just say just an overall awareness has just made me just be more mindful when I'm out in nature. And then when I'm recreating, I just I've lost the drive to, I don't do a ton of, I don't go to ski resorts anymore. I very minimally mountain bike. I've restricted my use a lot just because I just can't in good conscience do it.
Don't want to be one of them.
Yeah. I don't want to be a hypocrite. Right. So
yeah.
I'm just more aware of all the ways in which I impact the landscape. And so I just try to do the things, not completely restrict myself to where I don't go out and have fun, but I'm just really mindful of where I'm doing it. And also when I am around wildlife in a situation where it's outside of hunting seasons, I'm not the one that's trying to get closer to the animal to get photos. I try to keep my distance and give them wide berth and try to make sure that they don't know I'm there.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point. I find myself doing that a lot. When I see deer, that I don't want to harvest, I always find myself being oh, don't mind me. Don't, if it's a doe with a fawn, I'm oh, I'm sorry, mama. I didn't mean to disturb you. And I'm running the other way. Which is so silly, but I always think about that. I don't want to stress them out unnecessarily,
Yeah, I'm the same. And I where I live, we just always see deer and moose, and you just see so many people that pull over and get out of their cars, and the moose is just trying to eat,
kill them.
Yeah. And it's just putting stress on them, just so they can get their photo. And it's something that people just don't think that scaring the moose is going to have an impact on it, but it definitely does.
I want to come at that question in a slightly different angle, thinking about it more of how to make yourself more successful in the hunting world. First of all, bring a horse. Second,
have you seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? I'm bringing coconuts to my tree.
Oh. Where are you going with this? Yeah.
I already smell like a horse hunting in August.
And then the other thing is, you were talking about, if I see some hunters pushing elk up a hill and then you see some other hunters pushing elk downhill, I'm going to go stand in the middle of that hill for two reasons. One, we know that elk are going to respond to people's presence on the landscape. So if you already know that some hunters went one way, probably a good idea to go a different way. But that also then limits the impact and prevents you from accidentally creating a trail. That's my take. It's my hot take. No cap.
I definitely going to be way more aware of my spread of invasives. I mean, with the Caesar weed, they're annoying as hell.
In Florida, you can't stop it anymore.
Yeah, it's the Caesar weed's out of control. But yeah, I'm definitely way more cognizant of my impact, my non-consumptive impact while scouting, while hiking with my fiance, just trying to be stealthy and not cause too much disturbance, sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
and the coconuts.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt.
No, you're good. I guess the only thing I'll add was, coming back to the study, seeing how, everything has an effect, but it does seem ATVs have more of an effect, and maybe I'll just continue to not get one. No, just because I haven't been able to afford one.
Save some money.
Yeah, I'll just save some money. Yeah. No, but
I literally just got a side by side with the Dakota you're going to be using this season.
But I think those things have use to, get you to the edge. That's kind of how I see it. That's what I would use them for. Get to the edge, and then from there, walk around. Even if there's a trail that you can continue on, just walk it. Enjoy the outdoors on foot rather than driving through it and disrupting it. Because also, there have been times where I go out in the woods and I'm deep in the middle of it, and I hear a 4-wheeler coming. I'm like, oh, come on, it was so quiet and peaceful. They have a right to be there. I'm not saying that, unfortunately, but and I'll also just mention. So Britt mentioned the wilderness areas. Are you guys familiar with wilderness areas and the restrictions that they have? Because I kind of just learned about this here in Colorado. So it's, correct me if I'm wrong, there's probably more than just this, but there's no motorized vehicles allowed at all within the wilderness areas, which comes back to what we're talking about.
Or mechanized.
Okay, yeah.
No
you
bikes.
can't use a bike. Yeah, you can't use a bike.
No chainsaws, nothing. Yeah.
So I don't know. I just think that that's a great example of, this kind of spectrum from, an area where you've got your town park all the way to the wilderness area where you can still get out there. There's no designated trails, but it's foot traffic only, right? So I think that's something that is a great management action to help protect some of these species.
And I will say, I just recently got into dirt biking and I absolutely love it. And I use it because I'm taking it on roads that I would normally drive my truck on, right? So it still lets me have access to these backcountry places. And so I'm not anti ATV or side by side or dirt bikes. I'm not anti motorized use. It's just
use it responsibly.
Right place, right time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, you just reminded me of a really negative experience I had. I was turkey hunting in the Ocala National Forest, and these guys came just ripping through, just full throttle with 3 dirt bikes on trails they weren't supposed to be using that time of year. Just no fucks given. And they, they all had souped up exhausts that were so fucking loud. You could hear them from a mile away. Mm-hmm. And it just completely ruined the experience. I'm you can be out there, just do it respectfully and just,
Yeah. Where you're supposed to.
Yeah. Where you're supposed to be. And just don't be an asshole. There's other people trying to enjoy that land as well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good note to end on. Don't be an asshole, everybody. All right. Well, Britt, thanks for coming on. I know we've been trying to get this going for a little while, so I'm glad we could finally make it happen. So,
that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you guys. Thanks for having me.
For sure. All right, guys. Have a good night. And everybody who's listening, make sure you subscribe or follow or click whatever button is on the platform that you're using. And maybe send it to a friend that might think this one's interesting. Thanks for listening. Peace.
Bye.
See ya.